Hello, greetings to everyone watching. My name is Vitor Buchvar Fernandes, and on behalf of the Instituto Governança de Terras, I would like to welcome you all to the last panel of the International Conference on Land Governance and Economic Development. First and foremost, I would like to thank the Global Land Alliance and the Land Portal for their support to this conference. Today, we're going to be focused on the relationship between land tenure and deforestation in the Amazon, presenting different evidence-based points of view and discussing possible alternatives to solve problems in the region. With that in mind, we'll have the opportunity to listen to what four internationally recognized experts on the theme have to say, followed by a brief debate. It is expected that this session will last around 2 hours. If you're a viewer, make sure you write your questions on the chat on YouTube to the speakers so we can ask them when appropriate. That said, please let me introduce today's speakers in order of their presentations. The first speaker, Dr. Brenda Brito, will join us through a recorded video today. She's a lawyer and got her PhD in Science of Law from Stanford University. Born and resident in Belém do Pará, she is an associate researcher at Amazon, having worked for 18 years to improve environmental and land laws and policies for conservation of the Amazon rainforest. After I present her video, the live speakers will enter. So the first speaker, the next one after Brenda, will be Dr. Lisa Rausch, a geographer with expertise examining the drivers of agricultural expansion and the cultural, social, and institutional factors that promote or inhibit conservation positive behaviors among agricultural actors. She completed her PhD in geography at the University of Kansas and is a member of the Gibbs Land Use and Environment Lab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison since 2013, where she's an associate researcher since then. Our third speaker today will be Dr. Annie Alencar, Director of Science at the IPAM. She holds a PhD in Forest Resources and Conservation from the University of Florida. Her primary research topic has been to understand the impacts of climate change and forest fragmentation caused by deforestation on the occurrence and increase of forest fires in the Brazilian Amazon. In addition, she has coordinated IPAN's initiatives to develop systems to monitor forest carbon stock and loss and monitor deforestation to support the development of REDD projects. At last, our final speaker today will be Dr. Bastian Heydon. He's a senior advisor at the Netherlands Cadastre Land Registry and Mapping Agency, usually known as Cadastre. He's a retired professor at the State University of Campinas Economics Institute, a visiting professor at the International Center for Land Policy Studies and Training in Taiwan, and also a visiting professor at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. His main research interests are on the topics of land markets, land governance, land regularization, sustainable development, environmental economics, and environmental valuation. Now, I declare this session officially open, and without further ado, I will play the presentation of Dr. Brenda Brito for this session. It will be a 10-minute presentation, and let me just put it here. Right.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brenda Brito, Associate Researcher at Amazon, and it's a pleasure to participate in this panel to share some findings from studies I have coordinated at Amazon on land tenure and deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. Amazon is a nonprofit organization based in Belém, in state of Pará, founded 31 years ago with a mission to promote conservation and sustainable development in the Brazilian Amazon. And earlier this year, we launched a report called 10 Essential Facts About Land Tenure Regularization in the Brazilian Amazon, which is available at our website for download. And this study compiles critical findings from a study about land tenure laws and practices in the 9 Brazilian Amazon states. And in the next few minutes, I want to share some of the findings of this study that I think will contribute to the debates of this panel. First, we estimate that 29% of the Amazon region lacks tenure definition. These are primarily public lands that belongs either to the federal or state governments without a formal designation, either as protected areas or settlements or private properties, for example. Also, there may be part of this area that has already been formally designated, for example, with land title issuance already, but the maps of such properties are not either digitized or not included in the publicly available database. We estimated that 40% of the deforestation between 2013 and 2020 took place in this area without land tenure definition. And such deforestation is evidence that those public lands are being targeted by land grabbers to force the government to issue a land title to privatize areas. Our report shows that the land laws from the Amazon states and even at the federal level, they encourage the continued process of invasion and deforestation of lands. And this happens because most of the state laws, they don't determine a deadline by which an individual can initiate an occupation in a public land and then claim a land title. For instance, in the state of Amazonas, if someone deforests and occupies a state land today and stays in the land possession for 5 years, this person will be eligible to receive a land title from the state land agency. But even when the laws they determine a specific occupation deadline, what we saw is that there is a pressure to revise the laws and then to change the deadlines, to postpone those deadlines. For instance, the National Congress revised a federal land law in 2017 and extended the occupation deadline from 2004 to 2011. It means that those who illegally occupied a federal public land after 2004 and as of 2011 can now receive a land title. And every time there is this type of deadline extension in the law, it triggers a new phase of a cycle that we call a cycle of land grabbing and deforestation that starts with the illegal occupation of public land, followed by deforestation to signal land use and to signal that land occupation. Then the invaders register the parcels in public databases such as the Rural Environmental Registry, CAR, and then they request a land title from the federal or the state land agency. If the legislation doesn't allow the recognition of such occupations, the invaders and organized groups, they lobby the executive and the legislative branches at federal or state levels, depending on type of area. They lobby those branches to revise the law in their favor. And when the law is changed, if the law is changed, it then triggers the cycle again to a new cycle of invasion and deforestation. And since 2019, we have lived in the lobby phase of this cycle because the federal government and part of the National Congress, they have been trying to change the land law again. They want to extend the deadline, the occupation deadline, to allow the privatization of public land illegally occupied more recently. And currently, there are 2 bills in Congress that, if approved, they can even enable the government to privatize public lands invaded in the future. Areas that are currently not deforested and not invaded, but if they are invaded in the future, the bills, they have a loophole that will enable the government to sell those areas through a bidding process. We also found that land laws incentivize continued deforestation and invasion of public land when they allow the titling of recently deforested areas without even requiring uh, that the landholders to commit to restore the illegal deforestation. For instance, a public land occupied a few years ago that continued to be deforested every year. So it was occupied, let's say, 7 years ago, and every year there was a new illegal deforestation until last year, until this year. This area, in most of the states, will be eligible to receive a land title. And the landholder doesn't even need to commit to restore the land, the illegally deforested land. So this is a problem because it means that even if an area continues to be deforested illegally, it will be eligible to receive a land title. There's not a prohibition of this area to become privatized. Another finding I want to share is that 43% of the area without land tenure definition in Amazon has conservation priority according to the Ministry of Environment. But the current procedures do not guarantee land designation to meet such conservation purposes. And this is because the land agencies do not have a transparent or participatory process for issuing a land title, and most of them do not consult the agencies that are in charge of priority land claims, such as, for example, environmental agencies, when is the case of conservation priority areas. So, if the state land agencies, for instance, do not disclose the location of areas that are in the process of receiving a land title, it's not possible to check whether they overlap with priority land claims. There is an experience, though, at the federal level of a chamber of consultation among other federal agencies that was created to avoid the situations of overlaps, at least in the process of designating federal lands. But most of the decisions made so far by this chamber designated areas for land tenure regularization, meaning for privatization, including public forests. And public forests cannot be put into privatization. So even though the chamber has created an environment of more dialogue and consultation, at least among the federal agencies, these chamber procedures must be improved. The chamber must disclose information previously about the areas under consultation so that external institutions such as NGOs, academic institutions can provide the inputs to improve the decision-making process of the chamber and to protect public forests to be put to privatization. So, if we want to design solutions to the lack of land tenure definition in the Amazon, we need, in my opinion, to start with more transparency from the agencies and also with public participation opportunities in the process of land designation. We also need to make certain boundaries very clear, and I'll mention two of those boundaries. First, we need to prohibit the issuance of land titles to recently deforested areas. And two, we need to prohibit future land occupations from becoming legalized. So we need to prohibit the areas that will be occupied in the future can have the expectation to receive a land title. Otherwise, we'll keep seeing the advance of deforestation into our public forests as we have witnessed in the last few years, and as we are now seeing, because the deforestation is increasing in regions that used to be more conserved, such as in Amazon states, with lots of evidence that land grabbing is one of the major reasons behind the increase of the deforestation areas. So I thank you very much again for the opportunity to participating in the panel, and I wish a very fruitful discussion for all of you.
So, very important themes being discussed here by Brenda. I would like to thank Brenda for sending the recorded speech. Unfortunately, she could not attend to the live session. Then we will not be able to ask her questions. Either way, the link for the Amazon report she mentioned will be shared on the live chat on YouTube by some persons from IGT. We shall now proceed directly to our next speaker. So please, Dr. Lisa Rausch, our virtual floor is yours.
Let me figure out how to share my slides.
Take your time.
Okay, there we go. All right, let's see here. Slideshow. Let's see here. Okay, all right. All right. Thank you, Victor. My name is Lisa Rausch. I am a researcher at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the United States. And I'm going to present a little bit of our research on land tenure issues that come up in the cattle sector in the Amazon. I first want to start with just showing you all the amazing team that I work with. We are so lucky to work with this group of international economists, field researchers, computer scientists, and policy experts. And without them, I wouldn't be able to present to you any of the work that I'm going to share with you today, which is all absolutely a team effort. A couple of more of our researchers are here. A couple of folks that we work with out of Brazil. Our groups. So overall, our group's goals are to evaluate and strengthen the outcomes of Brazil's zero deforestation agreements for soy and cattle, and also to improve understanding of supply chains and land use. We are fortunate to receive funding from groups like the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation and NICFI in Norway due to the applied nature of our work. And also we recently completed an interesting project with the Meridian Institute. So different other groups like those guys. And I'm gonna actually be presenting quite a bit of the work that we did with Meridian to you all today in this presentation. The work that we do in the Gibbs lab is very applied. We spend a lot of time with policymakers and other stakeholders in the soy and cattle sectors in Brazil, trying to understand what are the most important questions that we can try to answer using a variety of data sources to help move the policy forward and make policies more effective. We bring in GIS analysis, remote sensing. We've started to work with big data techniques due to some extremely large data sets that we use in some of our work. We try to apply statistical models whenever possible so that we can ensure that the results that we get are rigorous when we assess policy impacts. And then when it's not pandemic times, we bring in field surveys of producers and stakeholders to add richness and also to contextualize the work that we do with other data types. Today, I'm going to focus on our research on the zero deforestation cattle agreements, which you'll see called the CAs in a lot of my slides, just for shortening it. We've been working on this topic for nearly a decade at this point, as long as the cattle agreements have been in place, basically. Our main findings so far just to set the scene a bit, are that the cattle agreements are crucial to the mix of policies that are needed to stop deforestation in the Amazon. They have had impacts on slaughterhouses' sourcing policies and have reduced deforestation in supply chains. But so far, the impacts on forest conservation have been largely washed out by problems like leakage and laundering in the agreements. There are efforts to improve and expand the reach of the cattle agreements that are ongoing, and I will talk a little bit about that in a minute. So today I'm just going to present a few high-level results from some of our research that is about the cattle agreements and about the cattle sector in Brazil, but that touches on land tenure. Of course, land tenure is a topic that kind of permeates all of our research, even though that's not always our focus. I'm going to cover ownership of multiple properties and the role of land portfolios in these supply chain agreements and the cattle supply chains, illegal production of cattle in protected areas, which lines up nicely with what Brenda was talking about in the previous presentation. Property sizes and the role that plays in the supply chains and the agreements, and then also just general distribution of deforestation and also fires beyond properties. So the first topic is an observation that multiple property ownership is possible in the Amazon. I mean, of course, people can own more than one property, and people can also register more than one property across multiple parcels. And so the relevance of this for a lot of our research is that the cattle agreements use the CAR as the unit of monitoring. So when people have a property that they've broken up into multiple CARs, that means that the slaughterhouses are often monitoring just one of those properties. And so that leaves other parts of their property unmonitored due to the multiple CARs. This has a significant impact on reducing the reach of the policies and the reach of the monitoring by the slaughterhouses. So the graphic on this slide is showing a blue main property that would be the property that the slaughterhouse would monitor. And then you can see the yellow properties are what we sometimes call auxiliary properties. So those are all additional parcels that are owned by that same producer and used in the same cattle production systems that they're using on their main property. The implications of this for supply chain monitoring and for the cattle agreements are huge. About 1/3 of the properties that are formally participating in the cattle supply chain are part of a portfolio, or which is a term that means that the owner has multiple properties, like on the slide, on the previous slide. And this has even further implications because the unmonitored auxiliary properties are more likely to have deforestation than properties that are listed on the cattle sales paperwork and monitored by the slaughterhouses. A second issue that comes up in our research is encroachment on protected areas and indigenous areas, which of course has serious environmental and social consequences. There's recently been a bit of media attention on this topic in The Guardian, Manga Bay, Amnesty International put out a big report last year, I think, on this topic. We have a paper under review right now where we've been looking at this, trying to quantify the amount of cattle or the amount of properties producing cattle that are in protected areas in the 3 main cattle producing states, in the Amazon, Rondônia, Mato Grosso, and Pará. And we did find evidence of major slaughterhouses directly and then also indirectly buying cattle that are raised in these areas, just like those media reports have shown. When we looked at data from transaction data from 2013 to 2018, we found that almost 3% of the cattle slaughtered during that time period could be directly or indirectly linked to protected areas. That's about 600,000 heads of cattle during that time period. The surprising thing is that almost 1/3 of those heads came from direct suppliers. And so these are farms that the slaughterhouses are supposed to be monitoring. Almost all of the direct suppliers producing cattle in protected areas are selling those cattle to slaughterhouses that have signed the cattle agreements and are supposed to be monitoring for illegal production of cattle and deforestation, and then also within protected areas. This is very easy to monitor for. They have these CAR properties and they can overlay them with protected areas. And so these are cattle that are slipping into supply chains when they really shouldn't be. A third topic of relevance is that property size matters for deforestation. We have shown that large properties are more likely to deforest and they deforest more area. Others have shown this as well. An interesting study that we did a few years back, where we looked at overlap of land tenure and environmental policies to understand how those things can affect deforestation behavior. And we found that for properties that are of a certain size, 100 hectares to 4 fiscal modules, which is about 300 or 400 hectares in the Amazon. And here we were looking just at the state of Pará, actually. Enrollment in the land titling program, Terra Legal, when combined with CAR registration, led to a significant reduction in deforestation after that registration. Those properties in that particular size class were 30% less likely to deforest than other same size properties. And we did not find an impact for properties in other size classes. When we looked outside of Terra Legal registration, the same size class of properties were 5% less likely to deforest, and still in this case, there was no impact on other size classes. So why was this? This is because for this size class of properties, the overlap of different land tenure and environmental policies created a situation where they had tangible and achievable benefits tied to environmental compliance. So for this particular size class, some of the policies that applied to them were the provision in the 2012 Forest Code that removed the obligation to replant forests cleared illegally before 2008. There were some state level policies that made registration in the CAR easier for these properties. The study was before the CCAR came out. And then also there was reduced requirements for the property to apply for CAR in this particular size class. In that same study, we also found another interesting finding, which was that properties strategically registered in the CAR to avoid crossing size thresholds in different land tenure and environmental policies. So we essentially made a histogram of all of the size classes of properties, and we found that this was statistically significant. Properties disproportionately registered just under specific legal thresholds in those policies, such as 4 fiscal modules, 15 fiscal modules, 100, 200, 300 hectares. These are all size thresholds that come up in land tenure and environmental policies. Then finally, on property size and land use, about 20% of properties in formal cattle supply chains sell to slaughterhouses, and the rest of the properties in these supply chains are indirect suppliers that sell to the direct suppliers. Most deforestation in cattle supply chains is on indirect suppliers, and these are not currently monitored under the cattle agreements. About 50% of indirect suppliers are less than 100 hectares, but over 3/4 of the deforestation on the indirect suppliers is on properties that are larger than 100 hectares. So with this research, we've been in collaboration with different stakeholders in the cattle sector, and monitoring of indirect suppliers will begin soon with some slaughterhouses, starting with properties that are larger than 100 hectares. Just to reduce the burdens of monitoring as they take on this next step. And then my final topics that I'm going to share with you today are just about the distribution of deforestation and fires on properties and then beyond properties in the cattle supply chains. About half of deforestation cannot be linked to formal cattle supply chains using, we use transaction data to identify which properties are formally participating in the cattle sector. And about half of the deforestation cannot be linked to these properties. And in some cases, it's even outside of the CAR. About 85% of the deforestation in the Amazon becomes pasture eventually. So what's going on here? This is something we're still trying to drill down on, is this properties that are being opened that will eventually be enrolled in the formal cattle sector. But right now they haven't gotten there yet. This is sort of pre-cattle deforestation. Is it speculation? Whatever the case, this is deforestation that's outside of the reach of the cattle agreements. And so, although we focus a lot on how to improve and expand the cattle agreements, we think a lot about the importance of other policies that aren't focused on supply chains and that kind of go beyond these different sectors that we focus on. And then finally, we have a neat paper that should be out really soon, actually, where we looked at the distribution of fires and fires for deforestation across cattle properties and other properties, and then outside of property boundaries during the 2020 moratorium on burning. And we found that a third of those fires, and then fires that were closely linked to deforestation, were located outside of registered properties. This is clearly challenging for enforcement and also deterrence in the future of burning, to avoid having a similar kind of catastrophic year as was had in 2020. Interestingly, about 10% of the car properties in Mato Grosso, Pará, and Rondônia had a fire during the 2020 moratorium on burning, raising questions about the efficacy of that moratorium, of course. And then also, the main finding in that work is that most of those fires were on properties that were cattle, that are involved in the cattle sector, which isn't surprising. Of course, a lot of burning is for clearing pasture. And so that's it. I threw a lot of results at you and findings, and I hope if any of that was interesting or piqued your interest, we can talk about it now, or you can reach out to me at any time. I'd be happy to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the very full of evidence and empirical material and review of many important papers by people who wrote it. It's always very nice to have this. Thank you for your presentation, Lisa. I think we have here, somebody sent me some questions. I have one of my own.
Sure.
I think I'm going to, we have like 4 minutes just to let you speak a little more about what you're working at and questions about your presentation. After everybody spoke, there will be the debate. So it's just a preview of the discussion.
Sure.
So my question for you will be 2 questions, one for me and one that was sent to me. So in your opinion, how do you see the evolution of supply chain approach policies to curb deforestation in the Amazon compared to 10 years ago? In the sense that what should we expect from these policies in the near future? Or can you comment a little more about this kind of policies?
Mm-hmm.
And the other question is, are there any formal estimates on how speculation pushes deforestation forward? What's the size of this illegal market? So feel free to answer if you want to, and comment on these questions, please.
Thank you for those great questions. The first question about the sort of the future of supply chain agreements, I definitely think that they're around to stay. There's a lot of commitment to them in the sectors that, the traders, the slaughterhouses, and then the soy traders as well, talking about soy. And then also there's increasing interest in these approaches from like investors and also, European and American markets as well, like sort of some of the international markets for these products. I think that they're at the same, so I think that they're around to stay. I think there's also sort of, I think like the shine has worn off of them a little bit. Like everyone's aware of the challenges, and that these policies aren't going to like solve deforestation, by themselves. And so I think that we are involved in different efforts to sort of expand their reach, but I think that there's also sort of like you know, I think it's going to be important for those policies to be coupled with other efforts to sort of cover the areas that those policies can't reach. So I think that there's just a lot of work ahead, basically. In terms of formal estimates on speculation, you know, I'm not aware of any formal estimates on speculation. I think it's a really tricky topic to nail down. I think that, you know, it's like hard to peer into someone's head. You know, we can see deforestation and we can look for land use, you know, kind of immediately after that to sort of get a sense for what the intent for the deforestation was. But, you know, it's just hard to peer into to someone's head and understand, you know, when something is being cleared, you know, is it the person like really wants to create a cattle farm, or if they're, you know, they're trying to you know, make some profit in some sort of less you know, formal way. I think it's definitely something that needs a lot more work. I'd love to hear what other people think about it.
Nice. Yes, we can come back to this discussion afterwards on the debates. So I thank you again, Lisa, for your presentation and for your comments. I think now we can proceed to the next speaker. I would like to call, please, Dr. Annie Alencar. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you for the invitation to be here discussing. I would say this is the most crucial discussion that you should be having about deforestation and how to reduce deforestation in the Amazon. Is the issue is related to the issue of land tenure and tenure security. So I'm gonna share my screen here. I also brought some. So can you see it?
I can see it.
Okay, so I guess
Maybe.
it's okay. So I brought some slides to help to see clearly, more clearly the issue about how land insecurity, in a way, is leading to more deforestation and fires in the Brazilian Amazon. And okay. So just a matter of general context. So the Amazon biome represents about half of Brazil. And when you look at the biome, we want, if you need to understand what is going on there, I think it's very useful to have a general idea of how the land is distributed. And if you take the biome, almost half is dedicated to formerly protected areas between indigenous territories and conservation units. About 1/4 is rural properties, small, medium, large properties and settlements. And about 1/4 is is undesignated lands, being them forests that were not designated yet, or other public lands that were not registered even as forests. So the Amazon is most of it is still, we have a lot of standing forests still, like more than 80%. But for the areas that were the forests, about 17%, depending on the source, most of it is dedicated to pasture fields, as we had presented before. So, and this is very important to have in mind because it will take to the things that we will discuss later. One very important element to this equation on how to understand the Amazon is the fire. And we say that because naturally fire doesn't belong to the Amazon, even though 41% of the total burned area in Brazil in the past 36 years occurred in the Amazon, I mean, fire shouldn't be in the Amazon. But fire is there, and is there because it's a very, how can I say, simple technology that is used by producers to get rid of like these tons of biomass generated by trees, trunks, branches, and convert this to ashes that are and ashes that are going to favor the implementation of mostly pasture fields, as we saw. So for us to understand how to reduce fire in the region, it's very, very important to understand these elements. The fire is a product of these three elements. So that's these three. So the climate, weather conditions, the fuel material, and mostly, then the most important, the ignition sources, because the other two are more difficult for us to, how can I say, to do something about it. Of course, we, in the scope of climate change, we have to reduce our emissions, and we can, but I mean, it's very difficult to say, okay, I don't want this year to, I want this year to rain earlier or something like that. So, but we can control ignition source, and this is the major issue. So when you talk about reducing fires, we have to understand who, how can I say, light the match. And lighting the match in the Amazon are related to these two major activities, which are deforestation per se, and then that follows burning and mostly converted to pasture fields, as we saw in Biome's data. The second are the pasture management. I mean, usually people clean pasture, old or bad managed pasture fields with fire, and so these favor the regrowth of new grasses and to be able to have a good feeding for the cows. And these two, they generate the third one, which are the forest fires, which escape from deforestation fields and pasture management fires. The Amazon shouldn't burn. The Amazon is a humid forest, but human activities are changing this ability of the forest to act as a barrier for these fires. And as these fires start to be more, how can I say, present on the landscape, so the forests start to be more, it starts to be weaker in order to, or more or less resilient in order to resist to these fires and start to become degraded. So it's just a general context for us to understand the case of fire and how is the fire today in the Amazon. And so in terms of fire, this year, 2001, was a very mild year in terms of fire compared to 2020 and 19, which had a huge, how can I say, increase in fire activities in the region. But in terms of deforestation, we still are in a very high rates. So you can see in this graph, which has a cumulative path of deforestation in the 2019, 20, and 21, which are the colored lines. And you can see they are, 2001 is very close to the line of 2020 up to now. So fires did reduce, but deforestation did not reduce. And to understand that, I think it's very good to understand the climate issue. So this year, even though the rest of Brazil is going through a major drought, the Amazon didn't go through a major drought. Actually, we had an impact of La Nina, which is a climatic event that comes from the like the cooler of the Pacific Ocean water. So it has an impact on the Amazon, generating more rainfall. And we can see the difference between last year, for example. So in terms of fire, understanding the fire curve and dynamics in the past at least 6 years, we did have major years of extreme events such as 2015, 16, and 17. So we were expecting to have more fire peaks in these years, and followed by a La Nina year 2018, and now we are in a La Nina year. But even though we were in a La Nina year, we had more fires, and that has an 2019, 2020 were kind of average, a little bit warmer, but not extreme dry events in the Amazon. So this takes us to understand what is happening in deforestation, and we are started to link this data with land tenure situation. So when you look at the last 6 years in terms of deforestation, we see clearly that deforestation changed from the basis to a new, how can I say, patamar, to a new stage. So since 2019, and so a 91% increase in the annual, not annual, but from January to September rate to deforestation. And we also have seen more polygons, like bigger polygons, bigger areas being deforested. And those, I brought an example from a region close to Labria in the southern Amazonas, where we can see large patches being deforested in a short period of time. And this is under undesignated public forests. So this should be forests. These are public lands. And I'd say that this is the central slide of the presentation that connects the further or the previous slides and information with the rest of the context of the presentation, is that we see the distribution of fires and deforestation among the main tenure categories in the Amazon for 2019 and 2020. And we see that more than half of the fires and deforestation occur in public lands. So at least half of the fires and more than half of deforestation occur in public lands. And most of them occur in these undesignated public lands, including undesignated forests. So, which means that we are in a big problem. We are losing, like Brazil is losing its own resources to illegal private occupation. And so just to talk a little bit about the deforestation and fires in public lands, we start with indigenous lands. People were saying, people not, long time ago, somebody was saying that the indigenous were responsible for fires in the Amazon, and we can see clearly that this is a very concentrated issue in some of the indigenous territories. For example, only 3% of the indigenous territories of the Amazon concentrate 70% of the deforestation, 50% of active fires. And the difference between deforestation and fires is because there are some indigenous territories that are dominated by savanna type vegetation. So some of them burn naturally, including. But which calls attention is that these areas that are concentrating the deforestation and fires among the indigenous territories, they are the ones that are suffering with illegal invasion that are dominated by pasture fields, as we just saw. And they are dominated by illegal logging, illegal mining. So, and just to have an idea of the implications of these invasions, we, for example, we have seen that it's becoming more, how can I say, it's becoming easier to see that an increase of numbers of cars, like rural environmental registry properties, a voluntary registry that people should do to be able to, how can I say, legalize their environmental situation. So some people are using this as a voluntary registry and doing polygons, large polygons inside indigenous territories. So overlaying with indigenous territories. And we have a case like this Ituna Itatá, which is an indigenous land located close to Belo Monte, and which more than 97% of the territory of this indigenous land that is going through the stage of being declared, demarcated, formally demarcated. So more than 97% is with registry in the car. So with a clear speculation, how can I say, objective. The same thing we have seen for conservation units, which are a type of protected areas in Brazil. So they are concentrated, deforestation fires are concentrated also in some of these areas, mostly in this region of Pará state, and they are also facing a lot of land invasion, and mostly when they invade the land, these areas turn into pasture fields. And getting to the most problematic element of this discussion, which are undesignated public forests, we have more than 57 million hectares of undesignated public forests in the Amazon. Most of them are state-owned. In second place is federal-owned. But when we look at the jump, the increase in deforestation, which are the here in this graph, we see that there was a jump in deforestation from 2018 to 2019, and that continues in 2020. And when you go further and you look and you combine the car registry with deforestation, we see that most of the deforestation that is happening in this undesignated public forest that should be forest, it should be public, they are occurring overlay in car properties or car registries. Pará state and Amazonas states are the ones that have more undesignated public forests that have been deforested, and also that follows the fire, and most of them in federal undesignated public forests. I flew these areas like in September, and it was very astonishing to see. I was very amazed to see how these patches of forests are increasing, were increasing actually, and clearly speculation, clearly for speculation, for land speculation. So we have increased trend in registries of car inside, on top of undesignated public lands. So to finish, I think it's very important to tackle deforestation in fires. It's very important to take into account where to start doing that. Unfortunately, there are a lot of resistance from rural landowners in order, I mean, to get to a point where they have to, how can I say, follow the law or maybe follow the forest code and things like that. So, but I think if you tackle deforestation by its root, by its illegal route, which is mostly the areas, deforestation that happens in areas that are public lands, we can reduce deforestation at least by half. So we would have, if there was no deforestation in public lands today, this year, we would have the same rate of deforestation that we had in 2012, when we had the lowest rate of deforestation ever measured in the Amazon. So what do we have to do that? To achieve that, what we have to do to achieve that? Basically, we have to focus on strategic enforcement, because all the institutions that deal with enforcement, they should be working together with a lot of intelligence behind. When I say intelligence, is to focus on the areas that are right, to get the big fish, designate public forests, and cancel all the cars in public forests. And of course, we also have to have a positive agenda, which includes consolidate protected areas and forest-based economies, give economic incentives for conservation private forests, and support with technical assistance the smallholders. But I think this half in red here is something that we can do now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annie. As with the previous presentations, I myself would have at least 20 questions that I could stay like an hour or more than an hour listening to the answers. Very rich presentation, also full of data and full of interesting concepts. What came to my mind is sometimes when we read papers about land tenure classes and deforestation, as you've shown, the case of indigenous territories usually are accounted for the indigenous population, indigenous peoples, because it's their area, but sometimes their area is being contested, it's conflict, there have many conflicts there, etc. This is one thing I think academics would have to be very aware of when writing up about land tenure categories. I have here two questions for you to answer quickly. One is this: how is the initiative Onomapa helping to prevent land insecurity and illegal occupation of Amazon public lands? Could you comment on that? And the second one, it's more general. So if you feel free to tackle this question the way you prefer. So as you said, the Amazon shouldn't burn and the forest fires are closely related to insecure land tenure and lack of protection of public lands. Given that, what could you say about the movement of the agricultural or deforestation frontier, its expansion in the last years, and what should we expect for the future, in your opinion? So feel free to answer as you please.
Thanks, Vito. Well, the two questions are very good ones, but very different. On Onomapa, I don't know if Onomapa is an initiative that we, IPAM, ESPN, Rede Cerrado, and others have been put together to help communities, mostly in Cerrado, but now it can expand to the rest of the country, to identify and map their areas, their communities. So the idea is to connect that with the public attorney platform. And our idea, or what we want with that, is to be able to facilitate the process of recognize the territories of these communities in an easy way, using an app, basically. So just to make the story short, in relation to your second question, which was related to what we should do to reduce the
regarding the expansion of the agricultural frontier that's linked to insecure tenure, deforestation, and forest fires, how do you see it in these 5-10 years from now till now, and what should we expect as a trend, or it will continue, it will rise? Just in your opinion, I know it's kind of speculative, but
very trying to be rapid here. I think the trend is clear that since 2019, a little bit 2018, we had an increase in the occupation of public lands and weakening of the formal governance of the protected areas, which including weakening of our legislation, which has been contested. So all these elements have been facilitated this environment where public lands are there for people to get money with, and invade. What I think, and this is because people will think they will make money with that. So that is a market. So the market was established in a way. The trends for the future, I think if we will need a lot the engagement of private sector, of society to change that. And when I see engagement of private, the companies or the private sector, I mean that if people are buying land or are occupying illegally land, they think they will sell this land in the future, So there will be someone to buy this land. So and then that's why we need to engage the private sector, saying that okay, if you I don't want to buy anything that is produced in recent illegal occupied land. So I think it's very important. In terms of society engagement, I think it's important to take the future to have better governance, to have government that is dedicated to fight deforestation and confront this issue of criminal activities in the Amazon. And society has a key role in putting the right person in the government.
I would totally agree. It's as an economist, it's kind of the land market starts when someone starts expecting that will be in the future a land market, and so it's happening this since a lot of time here in Brazil. Well, I thank you, Annie, for your presentation and for your comments. Now we can proceed to the last speaker before the debate. So please, Dr. Bastian Haydon, please come forward, and our virtual floor is yours.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. And thank you very much for the opportunity to be here in this such a rich and interesting discussion. We have been discussing quite a lot before in different ways and forums, but it's much nicer when we can be at least virtually in the same place. So I hope you all can see my my presentation. Is that okay? Okay. So
yes, it is.
Okay. So yeah, I will be talking a little bit. As you know, I used to be a teacher at Unicamp and was very much involved in those seminars. Now I am here at the Netherlands working on land issues at the Cadastre International, with the same aim as always had, to improve land administration and land governance in Brazil. So I will go, as I don't have much time, 15 minutes. I won't go too much into the deforestation issue itself. I will go more to the land governance and the fit for purpose that are important. And I will talk about those two cases, one of Tangara da Serra and one of Cumaribo, because I think they can help us on ways forward. I'm very much, let's say, one reason to be here at Cadastre is because here is an institution where people are doing things, trying to solve things. You know, it's quite a different perspective from the academic life that I also like very much, but at this moment of my life, you know, I'm trying to see if I can find ways. So you all talked about the deforestation that is increasing, and it's a big problem, as we know. I think the simplest idea that has to be behind our mind is that land is an asset, and as an asset that has a secondary market. So there is always somebody that's going to buy it. And if it's deforested, it's much easier to sell it, and it gets even a higher price. So it doesn't matter if the person is going to use it immediately or not, but its value increases a lot when you deforestate it. So they are always doing that just because they know it's going to be a way forward of making money. I won't also go into all this data, but it's clear that most deforestation, and I'm using lots of work from you, from IPA, that have been working on this. So most deforestation really occurs on state land in general, let's say. But okay. So my main idea is that the way forward has to do with having a good land administration system. But before that, I just wanted to show this study that Gert Sparovek, myself, and many other people made, where we showed, this is for the total of Brazil, but this is, I think, the first time that we have a complete set of data based on CAR and CGEF and all other databases that we have in Brazil, that we could have an idea of what is happening. So we have clearly from this basis, we have around near enough 200 million hectares that are not or unregistered or in the undesignated lands. So there is a lot of land that has to be still registered and has to get into the cadastre system. I just wanted to say one thing. When a CAR was going to be started in 2010, 2011, I don't remember exactly the year, I and some other people that were near the government at the time, we told Mr. Deusdara that CAR would bring another level of let's say, of validation of ownership. And that's what we are seeing now. So we really have to be very careful when we do those kind of things. And he answered very clearly that, no, CAR is not, that doesn't have any relation with ownership, with land ownership. And we said, but it will be used for that also. I'm not saying that CAR is not important. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have the CAR. CAR is a fantastic base. But as you also are seeing, people that made a CAR on top of other land ownership are trying to make it valid, let's say. So we came to this table that is published in Land Use Policy, trying exactly to take away all the overlappings that there are, and there are many overlappings, and it's very much overlapping. But okay, what is my main message here is that we have lots of land that we don't have any kind of registering yet, and much of that is state land. Much, let's say, it's in the hands of the state level institutions, so the Institutos de Terras from the states, and much is on federal level also. So what is land governance? So the first thing that we have to understand is that we are thinking always about there is not only one way of owning land. Okay, so you have large, very large types of land rights. So you have the state that owns, you have the condominiums, you have the freehold, you have restriction of areas, you have informal, you have occupations, and private properties, and many other types of properties. So what we always think is that we have to create a cadastre with identification of those parcels, as Enemark and Williamson show. So this is land governance or land administration. You have to have a good cadastre with maps that has to be linked to the land tenure, so land ownership, all the legal side of it. And with that, you have to have the land value, you have to land use and land development. So in Brazil, because we don't have a cadastre, we start working here on land use. So you are only allowed to use 20% of your area in the Amazon, but you don't create the ways to control that. And also with land development, we mostly develop, and then we look if there are laws that are not being, let's say, being enforced. So this is a very important step. And I think we are quite far now already. Huh? So we have already quite a bit of information about land. And if we look at CIGEF with all its limits, yeah, we are already more than 80% of the surface of the country. So if we make a very strong effort of improving the information that is available and putting more information into the system, and then create ways of really enforcing land use, it's much better than what we have now, because we have a whole system that I've been showing in the past already, that we have many different institutions involved in land administration in the country, and we don't have anything that mainstreams that. So we have the SPU responsible for federal land. We have INCRA. We used to have Terra Legal. We have the Instituto de Terras from the States. In the cities, and the conversion of rural land into urban land are the municipalities. So you know, it's not organized. It's not linked. So when we talk about what is land governance, so land governance are the policies, the legislations, the regulation, the programs, the organizational roles and relationships, implementation, capacity, and all of this has to be integrated. Surely CIGEF is a very important effort already to integrate all information linked to land ownership. And it is very actualized, because every exchange that is done in any cartório and on any registry office of Brazil gets into the system. So that is already a very important step that many countries don't have. So it's important also to see, that's what I'm learning here at Cadastre, is that each country has its own problems with land issues, because land issues are complicated. And you really have to have this want to solve it. And it's at the stage that Brazil is now, with the amount of information that we have, I would say it's not that difficult. We really need a government that is working on that in a very integrated way. So there is much being around in the world. So we have the LGAF, we have the voluntary guidelines from FAO. So we have already, let's say, the institutional basis for the changes. We have the LADM, and it's an ISO institution. So it's ruled, it is certificated for all countries. We have the fit for purpose methodology. That's very important, because its idea is that we don't need very sophisticated systems to solve land issues. We need what is really needed. That's why we call it fit for purpose. So Brazil in the past decided to have an accuracy of 50 centimeters on the measurement. That's not needed. We had advances on that, but we still have to advance more. So we have the FELA, so United Nations Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management, made another, let's say, framework for effective land administration. So it's not difficult. It's a matter of advancing. So what is the fit for purpose land administration? It's basically, we have to use a good spatial framework, and we can go deep in this, but we don't need. We have to have a participatory field adjudication. This is very important because the participatory systems make it clear and make people be involved, and it really makes it more difficult, any kind of fraud. So that is very, very important. And a continuity of accuracy. You don't need to go so accurate right now. You can go slowly, start with a less accurate, and then improve it. An institutional framework, this is very important. And this is where we have the biggest problem in Brazil. It has to be holistic, transparent, sustainable, ongoing capacity, continuous services, a legal framework. Here also, we have such an amount of legislation related to land issues. From the simplest issue, let's say from valuation for expropriation, every institution uses another one. For regularization, every government institution uses another one. So it is important to try to integrate all what we have. So those experiences that we had in Brazil, we had one in Tangara and we had one important in Cumaribo, Colombia, but we are doing other ones in Colombia. And we are seeing very clearly that when you go to the field and when you do this, what it has to be done, people understand where are the bottlenecks. Because if we stay in our offices discussing if it has to be this year or that year, where things don't advance. So that's what we are mostly doing in our experiences from Cadastre. So in Mozambique also, we go to the field, we see, we work with the people from the governmental institution, because Cadastre is also a governmental institution. So we don't work for profits, we work together with the countries to help them to solve their issues in different ways. So there are issues that have to be solved in a much more aggregate level, like NSDA, National Services of Infrastructure Information, and other ones have to be solved on a much more local basis. So those cases show a little bit of that. We test the effectiveness of fit for purpose in the Amazon, Brazilian Amazon. It was very interesting because I started this project some years ago just to see if what was the loss of accuracy when we were measuring using a more simple system than the ones that the Brazilian legislation obliged people to use. And at the end, we were able to regularize some properties. So we wanted really to see how it worked. So we went to the field there. We measured with those people, and the whole system is done as this picture shows. That the neighbors are going together, looking at their properties. Divisas, I forgot the name in English now. So they are already agreeing on what is the division of the properties between them. And then it's a whole complete methodology. Then at the end, you have a public inspection, as we call, and this other picture is more or less that, where the people get together, and we, using this system, we can show to the people their properties, and we can show who is the neighbor, and they agree in where the division is between their properties. So this is very, very important. And as they do that in public, everybody is really agreeing. So we can see who is doing, let's say, has the rights to the land. So the whole thing is who has the right. It's not who has the legal right, but who has the right. That's what we try to do. So, and we use the information that exists. So we use the information from the Instituto de Terras, from CIGEF, from whoever it is, and that is the way we can show and see the properties. So here we were able to give out those titles. That was very interesting. and had big impact here in the Netherlands because the government also always wants to have the problem solved. Kumaribu, it's a so this came from a boundary conflict between indigenous people and some other in this region here. It's also Amazonic region. It's not an Amazonic biome where we were, but this gives the idea that it's possible. We are doing now some other projects in other regions, more in the Amazon region from Colombia, but I don't have the results yet, but it's very interesting. So here, this is a resguardo. This is what we call in Brazil terra indígena. If I'm not mistaken, it's 200,000 hectares. And here is where this red area is where the conflict is, where the problems are of the neighbors. So I didn't go there, but the team went there and more or less do what you have. So first we start with the socialization with the indigenous community. So we ask permission for the colonos to indicate their land claims in the indigenous reserve. And there was also a military area that was also in conflict with those indigenous people. So then we train the young people, as we also did in Tangara, for them to use an app, a very simple app, and they love to do that because they learn, they do it on the field, and they really get involved in it. And then we go on the field to measure the parcels. So we do it once here, at least we did it once with the indigenous people and in the other areas, and then the other way around. And then the measurements from the colonos and the military. Here there was another issue because of the roads. They changed there of places. And those are the points that the indigenous people had established as the main areas, their main areas. Here we are measuring it. And then we process the information. Also we get the let's say the official document of ownership that they have, if they have. We also get their identification when we put all that in the app. So that was the way of having all this solved. Then we have the public inspection where everybody sits in a room like this, and we show on screen what they saw on the field, and here is the result. So this was very interesting because here we can see this is what is on the title from the indigenous area, and this is what we could see on the field. So, and this is what we so this is what we had on the field, and here you see the other properties that were there. So the conclusion of this is that mostly what happened is that the way it was established in law, it's not the clearest that we can see now with all the technology that we have. So there was just this area here had, let's say, an invasion or a kind of invasion, because all this other area was that the military that were here, they had their measurement was until here. So there is an overlap between their legal right and the legal right of the indigenous people. And that could be solved, that can be solved. So then after this, everybody, okay, so now those people are not really grabbing each other's land, and we can together try to solve that. And many times it is what is happening. So this case shows that working on the reality on the field, many problems can be solved. Participatory mapping can solve many of the land problems in areas that are derivated from inaccurate localization than in the past. Communal land rights can be guaranteed, solved by fit-for-purpose methodology, where mostly forests are. So that's more or less the idea that at least I have, that we could, all this area that is not clearly designated, and we know more or less where it is, we could develop the projects to do this together with the let's say, federal government, with the state government, with the FUNAI, with all those institutions, to really see where real problems are and where real problems are not. But we always have this feeling that, oh, it's a big problem. Everybody, everywhere we have invasion of land and this and that. So we can do things in a very good way. So the fit for purpose can play an important role in diminishing deforestation. There are cheap, effective, participatory, and technological adequate ways to clarify land rights in the Amazon forest. Clear land rights, private, communal, and public, plays a very important role in diminishing the deforestation, as literature and cases show. So this is more or less also what I wrote with some other people in those articles here, and they are in land use policy, and those two cases are written here in this open access journal, Land, that you also can see if you are interested, and I'm here open for more information. And there are some videos on those issues that you can also see. Thank you very much, and I hope I didn't went over my time too much.
Thank you, Bastian. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's a fair warning, transparency warning to say Bastian was my supervisor, so I'm biased to say that I liked very much this presentation. You're always learning new things with Bastian. I have here, since you exceeded a little your time of presentation, I'll ask quickly your questions. So the first one I selected here is this. It's around fit for purpose, so you can elaborate a little bit. And the other one is about cadastre and the international experiences. So fit for purpose methodology is a way of bringing a different or innovative mechanism for solving tenure insecurity. Given that, in the case of Brazil, how could we scale up the fit for purpose regularization? I say beyond that, could we imagine an overarching public policy that would articulate government agencies like the state land institutes, federal agencies, and fit for purpose regularization and other policies that are already at work? Could this be done, or we should have to select, do it separately? And the second question, so you can answer in a mixed reply. Should Brazil have a single institution to hold all land information, such as the Netherlands? If so, which institution should that be? Should it be created? Should we create a new one? This is the question. Feel free to answer when you like.
Okay, yeah, I would start saying that no more institutions, please. We have already too many. And as I see, I just was talking to the people from Mozambique. They created an agency, and with the idea that the agency would be on top of all the other institutions and would be able to integrate information and all that. So we really have to have a president that is completely, how would you say that? Completely attached to the issue of land, that he really understands that if we don't know where we are stepping on, we don't do anything. We have to know where we are stepping on. That is the main idea. Everything happens somewhere, and that's what we have to create. We have to be able to have, let's say, a president that has this view, and then together with him, we have to put all the ministries underneath him on this issue of land. And what is important of cadastre is that it is an autonomous institution, and it was able to have all land registration and mapping done very early. And all this information is always kept together. So you don't have, like in Brazil, the registro at one side, at the cartório de registro de imóveis, and the cadastre in many other sides. So it was already from the beginning together. But many other informations, let's say like the addresses of people that are linked to the land ownership, come from somewhere else, and it's not inside cadastre. So we have to create the mentality that we have to share information. That's the only thing we have to do, and that we have to trust each other. That I don't want all the information that is inside the cartório de registro de imóveis. I just want to know who owns what plot of land. And with that information and with a good IT system, you integrate all that. I thought that's one of the questions. The other question is that I think that fit for purpose is in reality a philosophy. So what does it say? We have to use everything that we have in the quickest way possible, and use this information as it is there and integrate it. So that is fit for purpose. So that's a very broad vision of it. So in Afghanistan, I did that. I used maps that the US Army had to see who owns what. That is something that we have to do. And with satellite images, you can do a lot. We can identify very many properties with it. Where we don't identify that with car, or with, and if you talk to people from INCRA, they're doing that. They're getting the CGF, they're getting the car, and then if they don't, with all that information that they have, it's not enough, then they go to the field. And that's something that we have to do. No, we go with the, and then we go to the field. And then in the field, we also have to have a quick system that looks at everything. And we have many projects doing that. We have to go to the state. And then, so I think there's different levels. So first, let's say we have to have this national view, and then you have to have different activities. One activity has to do with integration of legislation and all that. Another activity is integration of information. Another activity is looking down and seeing, okay, identifying who owns what. That's more or less in great what I would say. We have to elaborate on that, but sorry for talking too much. You give me the floor. It's
no problem. Well, thank you again for your comments and also for the presentation. There is a question from the chat, but I will ask you later because we have to proceed with the debate. So I would like to invite all the speakers to open their cameras and microphones when they are going to talk. So we shall begin our first round of questions so everybody can comment. You can leave all your cameras open because it will be on the live. So remember that also, as I said earlier, if you want to interrupt me, it's not a problem. I think everybody here is okay with that. We can do it very informally. I will ask a question, a pre-elaborated question to guide the debate, and you can answer it in the order of the speakers, or you can choose not to answer it if you don't feel like it. And also you can afterwards make questions for other speakers, and we can proceed like that. If anything you want to add, you can stop me talking and open up your mic. So the first question that if we have time, I'll have a lot of other questions, so don't worry about that. Take your time if you want to answer or not, it's not a problem. So the first question is, it's rather a long one, so I'll read it slowly. Climate change and the environmental agenda is at last being given the importance it needs worldwide. There are many groups and intellectuals supporting the idea that without the participation of the private sector, it will be difficult to solve tenure insecurity problems at scale. Given that, how can the private sector, national and international, help to improve land tenure and to prevent deforestation in the Amazon? In a sense, as Lisa said, I'm not saying that, the question is not saying that private sector will solve everything, but how can we pragmatically expect something? What can we improve of their participation in solving these problems? So I would like to start with Lisa if she wants. If you don't want to, we can ask on other speakers.
Thank you, Vitor. I think this is a great question. I probably would have a lot to say about it, but I think that one of the most important things that the private sector can do. Well, I think, I think there's a couple of things, and I really appreciated the comments that Ani was making about the importance of the private sector holding their, in terms of the private sector, talking about like companies, right, that buy commodities that are produced on land. I think, having those, a lot of those companies have commitments to ensure that their suppliers follow, basic regulations, especially environmental and land tenure regulations. And I think that those companies continuing to make good faith efforts to ensure that they're not buying products from places that they weren't, from people that are producing them in places they shouldn't be producing them, like Ani was saying, is one of the most important things that the private sector can do to, make it clear that at least, for major markets, products that are produced in areas with, questionable land tenure, like that, especially places where commercial activity shouldn't be taking place on land, that those products are not welcome in those markets. And I think another issue that the private sector can contribute on is around data transparency. I think a lot of efforts to rein in the production of cattle and soy in the Brazilian Amazon is hampered by issues of data transparency, or the lack of it, right? The CAR and other land cadasters, so, in some cases, information about who owns that land is available to the public, but not in all cases, and certainly not easy to access for all of the different stakeholders that need to have access to that information. And there, are a lot of complicated, let's say, political reasons for that. But I think that, companies in the private sector making a case that that's essential for them to continue to do work in that region could go a long way.
Ani, if you want, feel free.
Yeah, well, I guess I started to answer in the question. The question you made just after my presentation. I think, again, if there is land to be sold, there is someone that is going to buy it. Otherwise, otherwise it wouldn't be a market. So, and I think this is the role of the private sector in a way. So, actually ensuring to their producers, the private companies, and ensuring that their providers would actually not be using or occupying illegal land, land in illegally. I think another element for that, and as a proof that is true, there is some part maybe of the private sector that, even though the private sector is making clear in nowadays, or at least the big companies, that they don't like the idea of illegal deforestation, they don't want to buy it. From there, something, at least in the imaginary of the land speculators, is that, okay, we still have a market. And so this idea, this concept has to be broken. And I think we have all the conditions to have better monitoring, transparency, and the work that Lisa showed. She could understand how the chain, like the cattle chain works, and where are these people, if they burn or not. So in nowadays, we have much more capability of doing that and doing this rastreability, this traceability of the products than before. Then in the end of 2000, the decade of 2000, when we had a major reduction in deforestation, and when public lands were not so much invaded, So what is the difference then? What happened there that is not happening now? And so right there, if you remember, the soil moratorium had a very important role in saying that, okay, we are watching, we have ways to watch what you're going to do. And now we have more ways to watch, better ways to watch. So I think the private sector is very important, and the private companies, I'm talking about companies here, because they want to say, I will not buy anything that comes from illegal lands, illegal occupied lands in the Amazon.
I will add to that. Transparency is the main issue, but the state has to play its role in that transparency. Yeah? But before that, we did a very nice study to certificate that much of the sugar production of not of Brazil, but of some companies from Brazil came from legal properties. So that is something that we can do easily. So you can ask, and that is something in World Bank projects. Every World Bank project has to comply with this. So you only are allowed to buy land, or projects can only happen where there is certification of land that is not of deforestation or not illegally obtained, because it's not only deforestation, but illegally obtained, and land grabbing is illegally obtained. But I think there are, again, sorry, I come with this example, but of the Netherlands, they were able to see that there was much land speculation here when Airbnb started. Many companies started to buy apartments in Amsterdam to use it for Airbnb. So they were seeing that somebody was selling a building or an apartment, from 1 week to the other, it was sold 3 times and its value went up 4 times. So they created immediately a legislation that prohibited to have Airbnb for more than 60 days a year. And that they can control by your income. So if you have a good system with integrated information, and surely you have to have because there in Brazil you already have a problem. When you register your property in the cartório, you already registered with the wrong value and purpose, and the owner of they don't like that we call him the owner of the cartório, the registry officer, he already tells you, yeah, put the value because the tax is 18% and it's too high. So our system is already built not in the right way. So if we have the information of the value of who owns where and all that, everything is much easier. So that's what I'm fighting for, to have this integrated system where we can see, and then we can go after the people. Because speculation with land will always occur, because it's scarce, it's an asset that has a secondary market. So everybody wants land. It's a good way of keeping at this moment that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We have nothing better than land. So we have to create for the environmental issues, for the water management, for forest management, for all that. That's what really need transparency and clear information.
Right. Oh, pretty good comments from all 3 of you. Just wish Brenda was here too, so she could add her opinions. And unfortunately, she couldn't come participate live. I think we have some time still. I will ask you to be brief, because we have 15 minutes and we have to at least 5 minutes for everybody to say their closing remarks. So at best 5 minutes everyone to answer. In the first question, I asked about changes in deforestation, land tenure security related to the private sector. Now, I just don't want to avoid the issue of government problems, So this question is more or less related with this. So changing topics now to the public sector side of the question, how the overall tenure security of Brazilian public lands was affected after almost 3 years of the Bolsonaro administration? In special, what lessons can we learn from that so we can have a better, improved land tenure correction issues and curb deforestation afterwards? So Lisa, you can start again if you like to. If you don't want to answer that, it's no problem, just say it.
Well, as the only non-Brazilian, Bastian, I think you count as Brazilian.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do. I don't want to take too much time answering this question, but I will say that, you know, from our perspective, you know, the level of transparency around land registries has definitely decreased in the last few years. So in our view, that's definitely going the wrong way. But I'll let the Brazilians take it from here.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the data shows clearly the consequences of weakening the policies that control and give governance on land and natural resources in the Amazon. So, I mean, we came back to 2 digits deforestation. So we came back to more than 10,000 square kilometers a year of deforestation after Bolsonaro entered. I became president. So there are a lot of things that are very, I mean, the media is all like saying about that. Every environmentalist in Brazil talks about that as well. I mean, all the efforts of this government to impact all the policies that like the licensing policy, the land tenure, I don't know if this word exists, regularization policy, and the mining indigenous lands policies. There are some of those, the other ones that have been, how can I say, excited the people that are in the rural areas and the agricultural frontier in the Amazon, because this gives a clear signal that the government is with them in a way, is with the people that are occupying illegally public lands. And so this gives an incentive, a pervasive incentive for moving on the frontier without any governance. So the lesson that we can learn from this period is that this is going to change. I believe this is going to change. I'm pretty positive this is going to change. When I started to work in '92, more or less, the deforestation in the Amazon was up to almost 2,000 square kilometers per year. And I never thought we would reach below 10,000, never thought. And I saw that after the peak, the second largest peak of annual deforestation that we had in 2004, 2005, I saw that it's possible. I mean, Brazil showed that it's possible. And it's possible to reduce deforestation with governance. It has to be linked with economic sanctions. It has to engage private sector. It has to engage the governments, and it has to have better monitoring, transparency, and it's possible. We have already reached that. And that didn't impact our economy. And this is what is important. So I believe that we will have to rebuild what we lost during this short few years. It will probably take time, but I also believe that we are in a different international context. The globe is feeling the climatic emergency, and this will be another force to pressure change in Brazil, and change related to reduce deforestation, because we are talking about one of the larger emitters of greenhouse gases of the world, which is Brazil. We are in the 5th position, and almost half of our emissions are strictly related to deforestation. And half of that emission is per se illegal, happening in public lands. So we have to deal with that. We will be forced to deal with that. And I believe that this will be faced sooner or later.
Yes, yeah, I agree with you too. But I really was impressed because just before the election of Bolsonaro, Gabriel was with me on the field in Santarém, and I felt how would I say that, the anger of soya producer against the preservation of the forests. You know, so Bolsonaro was able to make this, I won't translate it, this ovo da serpente come out of its, wherever it was, came out. So we have, you know, I grew up in a democratization process from the 80s afterwards. So I never thought I would see something as we saw those last years, because everything was every time going better on environmental issues, on social issues, and then suddenly completely the other way around. So it showed me also how it's possible to change, how things can change drastically without being able to do anything about it. But again, I think we have to create ways of having things more deepen, because the diminishing of the deforestation, as an example, was very much had an important of policy and control policies. So we have to have, and I am also quite optimistic, because I was talking to people that are dealing in the carbon market, and the ton of carbon went up already, if I'm not mistaken, 5 times because of the corona. So this is important to see that things are changing. So the carbon market is already increasing, and as you said, Anna, the whole issue of people are really noticing that environment is very important, and Corona has to do with that. The COVID has to do with that. So I'm quite optimistic, but I think we really have to work on, let's say, not on really more structural changes. So that's why I always come back to the issue of a good cadastre linked to good register, and that all linked to really creating policies that will be stable for the future, not for tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. And I'm sorry with what I'm going to say, but we won't be able to fight all the people that grabbed land the last years, maybe the last 10 years, but before that, there's no way. We will have to some way accept it or create buffer zones where we will have to deal later on. But we have to identify all public land now, that it makes it enabled to be grabbed in the next years. I think that is what we have to do in the first time, and really find ways to stop the burning and the deforestation. And I think we have the conditions, because the Brazilian state is strong when we think about other countries. So the whole system, it's now without money, but if you put a little bit of money in it, it will be able to do, because he wasn't able to destroy everything. And the structure is still there, and all what is around. So I think I'm quite positive and optimistic about all that.
Right. Thank you again, everybody, for the comments. I can give you at best 1 minute, Bastian. It came a question on the chat. If you want to briefly answer it. Roberta Amaral de Andrade said, what are the criteria for the choice of places to implement the fit for purpose methodology? Could you please comment about the distinction you did between right and legal right, or something like that?
Look, first, I think fit for purpose will be in different can be in different ways in the country. So it can be already in, let's say, building up an SDI, a national system of land administration, and integrating all the using LIDM, integrating all the institutions. There is already fit for purpose. There is another level of fit for purpose when we have to look at, let's say, how do we register, how do we integrate all the legislation that there is there already, and on another level, we will have to look at places where, let's say, the deforestation is the biggest, and where we have conflict of land issues. There we can also use the fit for purpose methodology to map the problems and to see clearly what are real problems and what are sometimes not real problems. And she also asked about, let's say, the legitimate right and the legal right. Many times, a legitimate right, the legitimate right is much more important than a legal right, because if you look at what was registered at the cartórios in Brazil, just in Pará, 4 times the whole state of Pará was registered in the cartórios. So that is legal, but that's not legitimate. So we have to work with the legitimacy. So if you go to a region, you talk to the people, you know who has the legitimate rights, even if he doesn't have paper, but he has the legitimate. So we have to think about legitimacy and not with legal. Surely that they will have to be together at some time, but at least to begin with, we shouldn't be too much attached to the paper.
Right. Well, I think we have expanded the time, and now we can proceed to everybody's closing remarks. So keep it brief, but not too brief. Everything you want to say, if you want to comment something, if you want to, you're open, and you can be informal if you want to. So please, starting with Lisa.
Thank you, Vitor, for putting together this exciting panel. I thought the conversation was really great, and I learned so much from the other speakers. I just want to briefly close on the same note of optimism that I love the optimism that Bastian's bringing. You know, there are some serious problems in the Amazon with deforestation and, you know, social issues surrounding land tenure for sure to be addressed, but I share that optimism. I think that the institutions Brazil has in place have a lot of promise, and there's a lot of hope and exciting work to be done in the next few years. Thank you.
I will continue Lisa's optimism. I think, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here with Lisa and Bastian and you, Vitor. I think we had a great discussion and a great, how can I say, points of views that were very complementary and now in a way synergic as well. I think we definitely need to take this into account and how to deal with public lands, and it's very, very important for Brazil's economy. And I like the reputation that Brazil is taking outside of Brazil, mainly also inside, but mostly outside, it's very it's impacting a lot and can be even more harmful to the agribusiness, for example, and they know that. So I think we need to treat that. And I have a proposition instead, even. Like we have this crazy target for our NDC that is to end illegal deforestation only in 2030, which for me it's a crazy thing, because it's illegal deforestation. It can be everything. 99 almost, I think 99 according to the map biomes data, alert data, 99% of deforestation is illegal in Brazil because it doesn't have like the right licensing process. So it's very blurred, this target. We could have a more significant target, which would be like, let's end illegal deforestation in public lands by 2025. And this is a clear target. This will reduce half of our emissions from deforestation. And then we deal with private properties and settlements and in another way. So I thank you for this opportunity, and let's continue this discussion because it's very, very important. Thank you.
Okay, I won't say much. I agree with all of you. And I think we could, let's say, have an agreement on that we have to improve land governance in the country. That's the only way that we will really be able to diminish deforestation. Without that, I think it's very difficult. So that would be my last words. So I am hopeful because I think with what we have already, we can do a lot. But to really get there, we need some more. And so that's what I hope that we are able to build on the next years, because elections is already there, and we have to have the commitment of the next president that he will take care of the surface of the country, because nobody is taking care of that. We have to make pressure for that. Otherwise, it will take a long time. Thank you very much again for this nice discussion. And I hope we are able to be all together in Brasilia in a few years to make all this what is needed.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Annie, Bastian, also Brita, and also the viewers from now and from later viewers, since this session is going to be recorded on YouTube. I'd like to say that if anybody needs something, can talk to me. I can ask the presentations for the authors, or I can get you the addresses for you talking to them. So I hope this live was as enjoyable and enlightening for everybody as it was for me. On behalf of the Instituto Governança de Terras, I will end up this session, and thank you, everybody, and see you in the next year.
Bye-bye. Thank you.